This is Gemara Baba Kama Daf Kuf Yod Gimel, and we pick it up in the bottom of Kuf Yud Beis and Mid Beis. We are 4 lines from the bottom, and we're in the middle of discussing the process by which a Bezdin can force a loivet to pay back, collect his land, etc. Amar Ravina teaches Ravina, Hi Shlucha de Rabban. This shliach of the Rabbanan, particularly referring to the shliach of Bezdin, mehemnin le kebeitre. He's believed like two Eidim. In particular, what we are referring to, if we look at Rashi, Rashi points out, what is this mehemin kebeitre? Says Rashi, Deloy mishaker bebeidina, that he's not going to lie. And the previous Rashi actually, teaches us more of the story. Shahalach lahazmin ish ladin. He went to call someone to din. V'chazav amr lebezdin. Einay right to lavai. And he reports back that this guy refuses to come to Bezdin. They gave him a hazmana, they gave him a summonings to Bezdin, and he doesn't want to come. So teaches Ravina, the shliach of the court has a credibility, as an emanus, kibei trey. Says the Gemara of Hani Mili L'Shamta. But this is referred to Shamta, to putting the defendant, the loiva, etc., into Chayrim. But if Psicha, but to actually put him in Chayrim, to actually write the document that he is in Chayrim, will eventually Mimayna come Mechserle. It's going to cause him a loss. To Kabayil Amesiv Lezuzi Lesafra. Because why? He's going to have to pay the Sefer, the scribe who's going to write the document. Loi. Then we do not believe one Shliach, but rather any time there's going to be a momentous ramification, a monetary obligation, then what you need to have two Eidim for such a story. Says the Gemara, Amar Ravina. So just to point out, so what do? It sounds very interesting. It sounds like we believe him with regard to put him into Chayrim, but we don't write a document to put him to Chayrim, and that's precisely how the Mefarshim explain that he's in Chayrim, but to properly write the document, that we will not do. Amar Ravina. Continues Ravina, and he explains, Yahavina and Zimna. We give a Zimna Apuma Deissa to the mouth of a woman, meaning even based on the testimony of an Isha, we would serve a summons to someone. Here we go. Apuma de Shivya. No, that's not the right page. Here we go. Vapuma de Shivya, and as well on the mouth of a neighbor's. Meaning, in order to, one more time, we're furthering the halachas of the summons, of the shtar hadrachta, of bringing someone to Bezdin, the hazmana. Says the Gemara, there's an amonis even by a woman and even by neighbors. But says the Gemara, V'lei Amarin, of course, El Delesa B'masa. Says only when the one that we're summoning is not currently in the town. Why? Aval Issa B'masa, as we turn over to Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, teaches the Gemara, but if he's in town, then we do not put him into Chayrim based on this hearsay of a woman, based on the hearsay of a neighbor, but rather if he is in town, then we wait, as the top Rashi points out, Mashamtina le dahanu issa v'shivi loy avdi shlichusam. Then we're more concerned. Tamrinan says the Gemara, Emar loy amru le de'emru ashkachinu shlichad beidina va'amr le. Because it could be that they didn't say properly that the Bezdin is waiting for him, and therefore if he doesn't show up, we would not put him into Chayrim. Meaning, if he's not there, then we do believe the woman, we do believe the neighbor. But if he's in town, then we give him a little bit more leeway. V'lei Amara, and continues the Gemara 3 lines down. We're only referring to a case in which the person that we're summoning, again, Ruvain owes Shimon $100. So Bezdin is trying to get Ruvain into Bezdin. Says the Gemara, a second qualification is only that Shimon doesn't pass by the court. Then again, we will not put him into Chayrim. Why? Because Amri, they'll say, because it could be that they didn't give over the message properly. Again, they're trying to summon Ziz to Bezdin. But if they know that anyways he passes by, it could be they didn't give over the message properly, and therefore we don't have the same level of the Amarin. And a third level, says the Gemara. And it's only where he who's being summoned comes home by day. Why? Because he was considered that maybe they forgot before he came home. So the Gemara is qualifying that in as much as is a high level in Amanis, afilu itza, afilu neighbors, but it's only whenever there's really no other excuses. But in a scenario where he's in town, in a scenario he passes by the Bezdin, in a scenario he comes home at night, in these cases, then these people do not have such an amanis, and we're going to give more liberty in order to give the proper hazmana to get him into Bezdin, which also parenthetically, just important to point out, we see the power of hazmana. We see that when one is summons to Bezdin, you can't just dismiss it. It's not a jury duty notice that one can just discard of. Bezdin calls him, he has to come to Bezdin, and rather putting him into Chayrim is at stake. Says the Gemara, Omar Rava. Says Rava, hi man, the cause of lay, psicha. Says Rava, such a person whom they wrote upon him, a psicha, al deloy asiladina. They wrote a document that he's excommunicated. Why? As we just pointed out, because he didn't come to Bezdin. Until he actually comes to Bezdin, we do not tear up such a document. Similarly, if they wrote such a document that he didn't listen, that they paskin a certain psak and this person didn't comply, we don't rip up such a document till he listens to the Bezdin. But says the Gemara, this is not true. Once he says, I'm going to listen, even if he didn't actually comply with the proper psak of Bezdin, but once he said he's going to listen, Bezdin tears up the document and is no longer outstanding on his behalf. Says the Gemara, two dots, about 13 lines down, Kuf Yigimel Amar Aleph, Amar Rav Chisda. Koivin Zman, Sheni v'chamishi v'sheni. Says Rav Chisda, we summons this person to Bezdin on Monday, on Thursday, and on Monday. Zimna v'zimna, basar zimna. We make an appointment, another one and a third, and then ulamacher kasvinan. And only afterwards, the Tuesday of the next week, do we write a shtar that he is in a chayrim. Ravasi says the Gemara, Ikloi Bei Rav Kahana. Ravasi visited Rav Kahana. Chaza, he saw, there was a woman that's on the Dina Bepanya. Ubisafra, Ksivale Psicha. He saw that there was a certain woman that they summoned to appear to court at night. And the next morning, they already put her into Chayrim. Amr Lei. So he's taken aback and he asked, Savra Lamar. Lahadam Rav Chisda, you don't hold it out. Rav Chisda says, do you give Monday, Thursday? Monday. He said, yes, indeed. Of course, we hold of such a din. But that is particularly by a man. There are times a man can be out of town, so we give him more time to come back to Bezdin. If she's home, if she's in town, and she just doesn't appear in front of the Bezdin, that means she is rebelling, and therefore almost immediately we put her into Chayrim. Continues the Gemara, 6 lines from the wide lines. Amar Rav Yehuda teaches Rav Yehuda, Lo Yavina Zimna, Lo B'Yamim Isam, Lo B'Yamim Tishrei. We don't summon one to Bezdin in the days of Nisan, nor in the days of Tishrei. Levimayli Yom Tov and on Erev Yantiv, Levimayli Shabbat, not an Erev Shabbos. Aval, however, Nisan lebasar Yom Nisan ubiyom Tishrei lebasar Tishrei. However, says the Gemara, to send the Hazmana on Nisan, to come to Bezdin after Nisan, Miyom Tishrei on Tishrei lebasar Tishan, then Kavina, and then we indeed do such. Mimali Shabbat, to send a summons on Erev Shabbos lebasar, the Ma'ali Shabbat le Kavina. My time. Says the Gemara, my time, because I've been the Shabbos started again an Erev Shabbos or after Shabbos. We don't send. Why? Because he's busy dealing with Shabbos preparations. Amar Rav Nachman on the first white line, Lo Yavina Zimna, says Rav Nachman, we don't give a hazmana Lo lebnei kala bekala lebnei rigla berigla. That's the people of the Kala during the Kala. That's during the Shiurim that they would come on Erev Shabbos, on every Shabbos, Obnei Rigla Berigla. Similarly, would happen on Yontif. Ki have asu lekamei derav Nachman Amar lo v'chlidu kinufaychi. It's for you that I held such a gathering. Ve'inna diika ramai chayshinon. On the day of the Kala, people would come. And Rav Nachman would say, what's going on? Why didn't you come to Bezdin? It says the Gemara, but nowadays, in Adika Ramai, that Lamaisa, there are people who would avoid the shir. You see the power. Everyone used to go to the shir when it was unheard of to not be there. It says the Gemara, nowadays, that's not true. Loi Chayshinan, says the Gemara. So no. So they're wrong. We're worried that they might avoid the summons, and therefore we would give a zmana even to someone going to the shir. We finish up part A of the shir by quoting the last part of the Mishnah. Lo davishish ba'achrayis mamish. Elafilu parav achayrish ba'chamar u'machamer acharav chayavin lahachzer. Why? And they covered Avim because the honor of the father that has an animal which has a taina against. What about items which are used? Not an animal, but an item, a table, a bed. Give a chacham and it'll become even smarter. And therefore, once we know you have to return a cow, a donkey, the same thing will apply to other objects of the father, which could also have the same stigma, a bed, a table, etc. With that, we move over to part B of the shir as we begin a new Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Ein Partin. Says the Mishnah, we do not take change, not from the box of the customers, nor from the tax collector's purse, and you can't take staka from there. Aval, you could take from the coins that he has in his house, or from the coins he has on the streets. The Mishnah continuing about how far does usage of a property of someone else go to. Says the Gemara, Tana, we learned in a Bryce, Aval noisin lo dinner v'noisin lo yashar. Teaches the Bryce that even though you're not allowed to take change, but you're allowed to give a dinner, but you're allowed to give a dinner and you'll get the change from it. You know, the classical taking change from the tzedakah box. Umaychsin. Continues the Gemara, the two dots. Says the Gemara that how can you take money from the customers? Umaychsin. V'amar Shmuel, dina de malchuza dina. The classical rule that whatever the law is, that's what we're bound by halacha. And therefore, he who is collecting for the government, there it is not his, it's the government. So how could you use it to take change? Amar of Chanina bar Kahana, Amar Shmuel, for some about a case where the collector didn't have a set amount, and therefore you have to change because he didn't necessarily have to give every bit. He was appointed himself, meaning the king never actually gave him the authority to be this collector, etc. Ika demasni lo'ahas. So the previous is similar to an Ika diamri, but Ika demasni says the Gemara, the aforementioned discussion, some learn as follows. Do not wear a klayim garment, even on top of 10 garments, even lahavriach ba, even that you don't want to pay customs on such clothing, so you want to wear them so that you don't have to pay the taxes. Says the Gemara, still it has kalayim and you're not allowed to wear it. Says the Gemara, lahavriach sameches. Masli deloy kravikiva, the Mishnah like kravikiva the Tanya. Also lahavriach sameches. So Shimon Mishum Ravikiva, but lahavriach sameches. So clearly the Mishnah is arguing, as the Mishnah says it's Asr Ravikiva held it was mutter. Explains the Gemara, Bishlam, they need kalayim. By kalayim, I understand about kliflis, machlekes, marasav davshin, miskavin mutter. Or marasav davshin, miskavin asr. That if it's without kavana, I can fathom a machlekes what to do with something which is an isser. It is kalayim, but you're not having kavana for that. Is there a potential heter or not? Alavrich was ameches, but to not pay taxes, mi shari. V'amar Shmuel din de malchus adina. There's a din of taxes, so how can you evade that? Amar Avchini bar Kana Amar Shmuel b'moiche she'ein loy kit. So there's no set amount. Rav Yanei Amri moiche so Aymin Me'ilav, he wasn't appointed by the government. That's the second way of learning. And now says the Gemara even a third way of learning the aforementioned discussion. Says the Mishnah, one who could take a neder against one who kills, against haramim, one who takes away other properties, against the one that collects the customs, the taxes, she shall truma, to say that it is truma and it's not belong to the kain. I mean, they want to collect a certain item. You say it's not mine, it's the kain's. She shall be melech. Even though it's not really truma, it's not really melech, we're allowed to say that. Ask the Gemara, how are you allowed to do that? You're allowed to say, oh, this is not a taxable entity. What do you mean? That you have to pay taxes. Amar Rav Chanina bar Kana Shmuel. What are we referring to? There's no set amount. To Rav Yani Amri he wasn't appointed a proper tax collector, therefore you're allowed to make things up. Rav Hashim, our third teretz. Kenani, you're talking about a tax collector who is not Jewish, and he thereby takes more than he's supposed to, and that's the reason why you could evade him on some level. Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, similar to this final answer that we're talking about, is Kenani, a non-Jew who oversteps his boundaries. Yisrael Kenani Anas. When a Yisrael and a Kenani came for judgment, Shabbat Ladin. If you're able to say Yisrael, you should do that. And say this is our halacha b'dini Kenanim. If you can make him potter in the rules of Kenanim, this is your din. Then what should he do? Should come upon him different strategies, different Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Kiva Amrein Ban Alav Ela Ba'Kivin Midnei Kiddush Hashem. You're not allowed to do that because you have to be worried. What are people going to say? It looks like you're avoiding. Therefore, there's a potential lack of Kiddush Hashem. It points out the Gemara of Rabbi Kiva Taima Dika Kiddush Hashem. You could come and steal Kenani, Mishari. If there's no Kiddush Hashem, you let it steal from a guy. Ask the Gemara. On the last line of Kufi Gimel Amid Aleph, that this was something that Kiva Darsha when he came from Zafirin. Legezel Kenani Shu Alser Tamlamar Achreinim Kargula Tialai. That you're not allowed to steal from a Kenani. Shalayim Shachanu, as we turn over to Kufi Gimel Amid Beis, Shalayim Shachanu V'Yetzei, you're not allowed to pull something away from the Kenani and let him escape, but rather you have to pay the Kenani for the Evet. Yachal Yigalim Olav. You would think that you could act in a foolish manner and allow the Kenani to overcharge. No, you got to be precise. So says the Gemara, we see that these actions against the Kenanim are not allowed. Comments to Gemara, Rav Yosef Loi Kasha Bekanani Ha Beger Toishav. Different levels. One is by a Kanani, that's our halacha, whereas the second halacha is not a stam Kanani, but it's a ger Toishav. Amar Le Rav Yosef, Amar Le Abaye, excuse me, Vatamayo Gabi Adadi Ksivi. But the two are written next door to each other. Loilach Ela Leger Shenemar. And therefore, not only to you, Aliger, Shenam Leger, Vliger, Tzadik Aliger Taishav, Shem Leger, Taishav, Mishvachas Ger, Zakum Kishoimer Oile Aker. Aker is a certain type of a desire in idols, and in Kralav Chavim. So says the Gemara, what's the halacha? That one who needs to redeem the Eved, Achar Nimkar, after it's sold, you redeem it, and from here Rav Akiva learned that it is usher for the Jewish Evet to steal from his master. So ask the Gemara, that what do we see? We see that Lamaisa, that these different cases of Gezela, Keneged a Kanani, Keneged an Evet, Lamaisa are not allowed. You're not allowed to steal, you're not allowed to take advantage. Ella Amai Rava, so says the Gemara, 10 lines down, the first one line is Ella comes like Rav and he says, Loi Kasha. Says the Gemara, fundamental chilik between the cases. In Rav Akiva's second din, it's actual gezela. That's very different than Havkas Alvai, which is just canceling the loan, to not pay back, to hold on to the money. That is going to be a different level than to proactively go and be over in gezela. That's going to be the difference between the two prices. Amarle Abaye says, by 1 second. Eved Ivri Havkas Alvasai who? When it comes to Eved Ivri, it's also a case of Havkas Alvasai. And Rav Akiva said it's also. So you're telling me Havkas Alvasai is butter, but the whole case of Eved is as such. Answers the Gemara, Rava L'Taimei, Da'amai Rava teaches Rava Eved Ivri Gufai Kanoi. And if you can't ask a kash from Eved Ivri, because Eved Ivri, the actual guf of the Eved is Kanoi to him. Continues the Gemara, Amar Rabibi Bar Gidl. About 15 lines down, the first word on the line is Bar Gidl Amar Shimon Chasida. What is the story? He teaches the Braisa Gazal Kenani Aser. As we just said, this is a rule that we have to remind ourselves that outright stealing from Goyim is of course forbidden. But Avedasai Muteris. But if you find an item that belongs to a guy, that's mutares. You don't have to return the item. Again, a similar split to what we said a moment ago. The difference between proactively going and taking something and just not giving something back. And explains the Gemara, where does this come from? Gezela yaser, damar Ravuna minayin legezel like an anishu aser shenemar. V'achaltas kol ha'am Hashem shalokecha noisin l'cha b'zman she'in mesurim b'yadcha. That's when you can take the envelope b'zman she'in mesurim b'yadcha. Whereas Avidasa Muteres, Damar Rav Chama Berguyim Ram and Ayin Avidasa Kanani Shehi Muteres. How do we know that Shenemar? Chlavidis Achicha Achicha Tamachzer Yatamachzer Kanani. The din of Aveda is the din by Yidin. Ve'ema Hani Mili Hechadas Liyadid Lama Chayvela Duri Basra. But maybe Avalechadas Liyadid. If you pick up the Aveda Emra Lahadri, maybe you have to return it. Amaravino matzasa dasai day mashma, that even though the item comes to your hand, the only time you have to return it is by a yid, but by a guy you're allowed to hold on to it. And that's the basic difference, explains the Gemara, between proper gezela from a guy, which is forbidden, and not returning a chayv, not returning a lost item. That's going to be something which is permissible. Says the Gemara Tanya. We are 4 lines from the Y lines, quoting a Braisa. Rabbi Chaz ben Yair Omer, be'emakom sheishchol Hashem, afilu evidasai Amar. Says Rav Pinchas, something you can never forget. If there's a potential chilul Hashem, if someone sees that it's the Yid that found the money, then it is aser. Afilu avidasai chilul Hashem transcends all boundaries, and any scenario that is going to be a potential chilul, then you have to be that much more careful. Amar Shmuel, 2 lines of the white lines, ta'usai. The ta'is of a guy, if they make a mistake, it's mutares. Ki ad Shmuel zavan ma kuti lakna de dava b'mar de barzila bedal zuzi. where Shmuel bought a gold bowl from the Kusin instead of a copper one for 4 zuz. Vavloi lei chad zuzi, and Shmuel put in 1 extra zuz into the payment. Rav Kana Zavin Makusi may have asked him chavita. Kana bought 120 barrels from Makusi b'money v'avloi lechad zuza. He bought 120 barrels for the price of 100, meaning he got extra 20 barrels for free, and he put a dot extra in. Amar le, and he said, Chazid Allah kosav china. Said to the Kusi, I'm relying upon you. From here we see that again, a toyis, if the guy made his own mistake, that instead of delivering 120 items, he delivered more, that's going to be mutter. Ravina Zavan Dikla Ravina bought a palm tree from who Vikusi Lisalacha, and he wanted to cut it up. Amr Shame Kadam Vaisi Mekar the Kusi. Ravina says to Shamish Kadam Vaisi Mekar, go and take my pieces in the bottom of the tree. The Kusi Minyana Yada, because he knows only the number, ensuring that that he wasn't over and outright Gezela. And another story that we'll conclude with, Ravashi Avikazal Ba'orcha. Ravashi was going on the road. Chaza Shivsha Dekufni Bevardisa. And what did Ravashi see? Ravashi saw an orchard, a vine branch, grapes hanging very low, Vitaliba Kitufi de Invi. And he cut off the grapes of the vines. Amrle the Shame, Zil Chazi de Kutinenu, I see the Yisrael. Lo, I see. Go check who owns this tree. If the Yisrael don't take it, if it's a Kusi, then you can take it. Shama Kusi, that Kusi heard. Taviyasa Bardisa. He heard that Ravashi was sitting in his orchard, and he heard that Ravashi wasn't going to pay. He was just going to take the grapes and run. Amr lei. So he asked Ravashi, the Kusi Shari? What? You're allowed to take something from a Kusi and not pay for it? Amr lei. Kuti shakal. Demei Yisrael loi shakal. Kusi shakal demei. No, what I mean to say is, a Kusi I'll pay, but Yisrael loi shakal demei. I will not take money, of course, switching it around in order to save himself from the Kusi. Kufa, and we bring ourselves back to Amid Aleph. Amar Shmuel Dina de Malchusa Dina. The fascinating explanation of when we have to follow the appropriate laws and they become halacha. Amar Rava Teita, I'll bring you a raya to Shmuel that Dina de Malchusa Dina. Dekatli Dikva Vigashi Gishri, that those who cut down the palm trees make bridges with them. Vav Dina Nalayu, and we use the item. So we see that even though at some level they're stolen items, but because the government allows it, it's okay. Maybe it's only because the owner is miyayish. The owner gives up hope. That's why you're allowed to use the bridges. Amarle, no. Ilodina de malchusa dina aicha miyayishi. Look, Avid. Kidamar Rava, as Rava taught us. Kidamar, excuse me. Malka Amar zilu vikatlu. Mikol bagi vanu azli vikatlu mechad bagi. He told them, go cut down the trees, where they went and cut down all the different trees. So it's only because of the Yush. Shlucha de Malka ke Malka of the loy Tarach. Ve'enu avsid anavshe. Why? Tibayle linkta mikule bagi umishkal demei. Why did he cause his own loss? Because they could have got payment for the trees for the valley, but Lamaisa they didn't. Again, we just began, touched this sugya of Dina Malchusa Dina. We'll pick up from here in the next year of Siyata Dishmaya.